The snow falls quietly, covering the ground in a blanket of cold white. But that silence is quickly stained by splashes of blood and the sound of ragged breathing. A girl lies lifeless on the snow, her face peaceful as if in sleep. Not far from her, another girl stands trembling. Her clothes are in disarray, her face stained with blood, and a hammer lies at her feet. Her breath is heavy, turning to mist in the frozen air. What truly happened here? Is this justice, or the beginning of a lie? Beneath the blinding white of the snow, there hides a darkness colder than death itself. In a quiet, snow-covered town, morning arrives peacefully. The frozen landscape appears calm, as if violence has never touched this place. Yet beneath that stillness, a tragedy has shaken the community. Inside an ordinary-looking house, a mother calls out to her daughter, Mizuki, to get up. Unbeknownst to her, the television news is reporting the discovery of a severed wrist, identified as belonging to the eldest daughter of an unemployed man from Morinaka City. A fragment of a body, disturbing the calm of a sleepy morning. Tension begins to creep in, silently, but surely. Inside a neat and sunlit room, Mizuki stands before the mirror. Wearing her school uniform, she gazes at her own reflection. Her hand moves slowly, brushing her hair, a simple motion, yet deliberate. Beneath her calm expression, it's hard to tell what she's thinking. When her mother enters and speaks in a casual tone, Mizuki remains silent, offering no response. This seemingly ordinary morning carries an unsettling calm, too perfect, too quiet to be normal. In a morning that should be calm, her mother's voice begins to fill the space. Sharp words masked as concern come one after another, about upcoming exams, late nights, and the fear of bad influences. Mizuki remains silent. No answers, no resistance. Every sentence adds new weight about her future, the family's reputation, even the idea of leaving the country. Beneath her mother's worry lies the pressure of perfection. And through it all, Mizuki quietly walks down the stairs, her face unreadable. Silent, yet storming within. The face of a young girl appears on the television screen, Igarashi Mako, a student of Morinaka High School. The police confirm that the severed wrist found days ago belonged to her, but her body is still missing. Mizuki stands with her back to the screen, silently facing the reflection of someone she might once have known. Her mother reacts with shock and concern, realizing that it's the same school her daughter attends. But Mizuki offers no response. No surprise. No sorrow. Just silence, an unsettling quiet that feels heavier than words. Meanwhile, her mother mutters to herself, struggling to comprehend a brutal murder in a countryside town that seemed so safe. But the real answer may already be inside this very home. The knife moves slowly in Mizuki's hand, peeling the apple with calm precision. Meanwhile, her mother keeps talking about bad grades, about the future, about staying away from crazy people. Her words are coated in concern, but heavy with pressure and fear. Mizuki simply asks, "Would you like to eat an apple?" A simple offer, yet it feels like a quiet signal. In her silence lies something unreadable. The knife is still in her hand. Her grip steady, her face composed. And her mother's voice continues, unaware of just how sharp that calmness truly is. Mizuki's gaze is blank, her eyes steady as her mother continues to speak. Word after word, laced with so-called concern about her well-being, her future, her family's expectations. But to Mizuki, it's just distant noise. She offers no response, only a silent stare. And then, at the door, she smiles. A smile that isn't entirely warm, but sweet enough to deceive. "See you later," she says. She steps out, leaving her mother behind in confusion and silence. Yet something in her eyes makes the world feel just a little colder. Mizuki walks alone through the cold morning, wrapped in a coat and long scarf. At the bus stop, a group of women chat quietly about the severed wrist, her mother's death, and how terrifying it all is. They call her a poor child, yet their eyes are filled with suspicion. Mizuki doesn't stop or turn back. But her eyes take in everything. Her gaze is sharp, empty, and distant. Beneath her silence, she knows the world has already judged her without hearing a single word. The bus arrives with a piercing honk, slicing through the cold air. But nothing can slice through the colder weight she now carries within. Mizuki's footsteps bring her to the front of the police station. With a shopping bag in one hand and a mask covering her face, she stands still, uncertain whether she's seeking direction or courage. Around her, people move as usual. But to Mizuki, every sound echoes like a whisper calling her name. Her heart races. A nearby officer approaches, friendly, yet startling. "Is there a problem?" she asks. Mizuki freezes, then slowly turns. Nothing's wrong, not yet. But the world feels smaller, and the air heavier. Somewhere deep inside, she knows, time may be running out. With a soft voice, Mizuki speaks. She talks about Marco. About the case that shook this quiet countryside. The officer steps closer, expecting a classmate with a tip or a vague recollection. But Mizuki's words are not ones that can be absorbed lightly. "It was me," she says. "It was me who did it." Her frame is small, her voice calm, but her confession slices through the air like a blade. No hesitation, no excuses. Just a quiet truth, delivered as if it were ordinary. But the world will never be ordinary again. Mizuki doesn't just confess, she brings proof. A knife wiped clean of blood, yet heavy with undeniable truth. The officer freezes, caught between disbelief and fear. Mizuki stands still, staring ahead, as if to say she has nothing left to hide. "The problem is, I already wiped the blood," she says. There is no emotion in her voice, just cold, bare honesty. Panic rising in the once calm room. But Mizuki remains unmoved. This is no longer just a confession. This is a declaration. The girl's footsteps came to a halt. Her grip loosened. The knife slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a sharp, cold clang. The room fell silent. Those around her froze in place, torn between fear and confusion. She stood still, her expression devoid of regret, relief, or panic. Only emptiness remained in her eyes. Inside the interrogation room, Aikawa Mizuki sat still, dressed in her school uniform. The officers reviewed the case, a stab to the abdomen, dismemberment with a saw, the victim's wrist sent to her home, and the rest of the body buried near Kakinaruma. All evidence had been confiscated, her knife, coat, and phone. Now, they only asked for one final thing, her password. One officer noted down, Aikawa Mizuki. 17 years old. Turned herself in. Classmate of the victim. Inside the dimly lit interrogation room, Mizuki sat motionless, her gaze hollow as the investigators surrounded her. One of them began sternly, probing into her relationship with the victim. She responded tersely, stating it was only a minor argument, an answer that was met with immediate doubt. The detectives pressed further, unpacking the layers that led to the tragic incident. Mizuki's expression barely changed, though fleeting emotions flickered in her eyes. The tension in the room steadily grew, pushing the conversation toward a deeper accusation, as if cornering her into revealing a heavier truth. Inside the cold interrogation room, Mizuki sits still as investigators press her with questions. Her gaze remains calm, yet something unspoken lingers beneath the surface. When they inquire about her connection to the victim, her expression subtly shifts. A trace of emotion, long buried, begins to rise. The room falls into a heavy silence, not because the questioning stops, but because something inside her begins to unfold. Her thoughts drift elsewhere. In the lingering haze of memory, Mizuki recalls that morning, when laughter came easily, and their footsteps echoed softly along the snowy village road. One of her friends playfully greeted her, "She is Marco," jumping ahead with a cheerful spark that briefly startled her. Despite the freezing air, the moment felt warm. Genuine smiles and effortless closeness wrapped them in a scene that seemed ordinary, yet full of meaning. Though fleeting, the memory holds something that can never be returned. As dusk settled over the quiet village road, Mizuki walked alongside two young children. The sky dimmed slowly, casting a soft glow over the old wooden buildings lit from within. Marco, an endlessly cheerful and energetic girl, was someone everyone truly loved. Memories of her flowed back effortlessly, even as Mizuki stepped into a small, modest ramen shop. A warm greeting welcomed her presence, as if the world remained unchanged, even though something was now gone, never to return. Inside the cozy little restaurant, Mizuki sat beside Marco, who greeted her with a bright smile and a handmade plate of decorated rice. The cheerful mood in the room stood in stark contrast to the unspoken hardships each of them carried. Marco, who had lost her mother early and lived in poverty, worked tirelessly at her uncle's shop to help her family. Mizuki, unable to find peace at home due to a cold and tense atmosphere, often stopped by the shop after cram school. That day, just like many others, they walked home together down the quiet path, finding warmth in each other's company. In a quiet moment on their walk home from school, Marco excitedly showed Mizuki a picture of her dream theme park in Tokyo. Her eyes sparkled with hope as she imagined the two of them going there after graduation, wearing their high school uniforms one last time under the city's dazzling lights. Mizuki hesitated, having only been there once when her mother was still alive. To Marco, Tokyo symbolized a bright future. To Mizuki, it was a distant, fading memory. Yet in that brief conversation, they both seemed to hold on to the same fragile dream, to escape to somewhere warmer, brighter, and freer. Beneath the fading sunlight, Marco eagerly invited Mizuki to go to Tokyo with her. Mizuki hesitated, her reasons were valid, yet deep down, they were walls she had built to keep herself from getting too close. But Marco's warm and honest gaze pierced through that silence, speaking more than any words could. In that single glance, Mizuki felt something shift inside her. She gave a quiet nod, not for the destination, but for the person who asked her to come along. With Marco, Mizuki felt something she had never known before, a genuine sense of comfort. Marco was mysterious, unpredictable, but that only made her more captivating. Day by day, the chains that had quietly bound Mizuki began to fall away. Her fears, her loneliness, the invisible walls she'd built around herself slowly unraveled, each one breaking apart as if Marco held the key to her freedom. When Mizuki spoke her wish, all she received was her mother's cold reaction. Her mother's face hardened, leaving no room for the simple dreams of a teenage girl. To her, the future could only be secured through exams, not through joy or distant trips. Mizuki tried to explain, but her words never truly landed. She stood still, her heart slowly swallowed by the expectations and limitations imposed by the adult world. Mizuki pleaded earnestly with her mother. She promised to study harder and pass high school. But her plea was met with a cold rejection. Her mother reminded her of her past failure in entrance exams, as if Mizuki's dream was merely a distraction from life's more serious goals. With clenched fists and a bowed head, Mizuki held back tears, feeling small beneath the weight of endless expectations. Inside the school bathroom, Mizuki and Marco talked quietly. Weighed down by pressure from home, Mizuki suddenly made a bold decision: she would go, even without her mother's permission. But one problem remained: money. A trip to the big city would cost more than she could afford. As Mizuki stood in confusion, Marco looked at her firmly, then said something that made her freeze: "There's a way to make money." Mizuki was caught off guard when Marco cheerfully declared she'd cover all the expenses for their trip. She claimed she had a part-time job. Mizuki couldn't immediately respond. A strange silence followed, one that hinted at something unspoken. On a table, 3 10,000 yen bills lay in perfect order. Mizuki didn't understand what it meant then, but she would, eventually. Inside the familiar shop, Mizuki sat quietly across from the grinning owner, who casually held out cash. He made a strange, unsettling proposal. Mizuki didn't respond, her body froze, and her face reflected a mix of shock and confusion. She had yet to understand that the situation unfolding before her would begin to shatter her trust in the adult world. Mizuki tried to leave, rising from her seat with the intent to walk away. But Marco uncle stopped her with manipulative words, crouching down with a pressuring gaze. He then took off his shirt, revealing his large body and a small camera strapped to his head, a sign that this wasn't his first time. Mizuki stood still, her eyes filled with suspicion and anger. A terrible thought struck her. Had he done the same thing to Marco too? Mizuki froze in terror as the man laughed grotesquely, switching on the camera strap to his head. He muttered twisted justifications for his actions, claiming he hadn't gone this far with Marco. When the recording light flicked on, Mizuki realized his true intention: to force himself on her and film everything. Gripped by fear, she bolted in an attempt to escape. But the man grew more excited, cheering like he was filming a grotesque show. Mizuki ran, heart pounding and breath racing, desperate to flee from the cruelty she was only beginning to comprehend. The man grinned widely as the camera rolled, obsessed with capturing what he believed to be a valuable product. Mizuki stood trembling in the doorway, trying to stop him. But he stepped closer, threatening her to stay still. In his twisted mind, Marco had been nothing but an insect, and now Mizuki was next. As the camera kept recording, he approached with vile intentions. Mizuki screamed and struggled against his forceful grip, but his strength and depravity overwhelmed her. Behind the unblinking lens, the nightmare continued, uninterrupted, and unseen by anyone who could help. Mizuki, who once trusted, is faced with a bitter truth in a place she thought was safe. Someone she knew reveals his dark side, approaching her with vile intent. As the situation turns more terrifying, Mizuki stands up, her eyes shifting from fear to determination. Fueled by fear and courage, Mizuki strikes the man's face. But her resistance triggers a brutal response. He retaliates with violence, pinning Mizuki down mercilessly. The situation turns even more horrifying. In a tense and desperate moment, Mizuki turned the tables. With a hidden knife, she swung her hand and slashed the man's throat. Blood splattered, and the man's large body staggered backward. Mizuki finally managed to save herself from the terror that threatened her life. Mizuki sat on the floor, a blood-stained knife still clutched in her hand. Before her, Marco entered the room, startled by the scene she found. As their eyes met, Marco understood everything, the truth she could no longer avoid. In that silence, everything became clear to her. After everything that happened, Mizuki sat in the interrogation room with an empty gaze and a flat tone. She confessed to killing, not just one, but more. Her words were cold, as if the burden she carried had vanished with the blood she spilled. The investigators were stunned, yet Mizuki showed no remorse. That day, in front of the law, the once innocent girl had completely changed.